Okay, I'm ready to put frets on the neck. The fretboard's been radiused. The slots have been chamfered, cleaned. The fretboard's been oiled. It's all ready to go. I've got my various tools that I need laid out. And first thing, the fretwire I'm using, I buy by the pound. And it ships in a tube like that in 2 foot lengths. So you get a 2 foot length. And the first thing you need to do is take a little solvent like naphtha or even isopropyl alcohol or denatured alcohol. And then you just run it through. You can see that was just running it through a couple of times. I'm going to need 2, maybe 3 lengths. You can see is that you get quite a bit of residue and machining oil and stuff left. The fretboard's been sanded down to a 12-inch radius, and I want to bend the fret wire to the same radius. So you can see this is my little homemade radiusing jig. It's a little wooden circular piece with a groove cut in it for the tang on the fret wire. Well, handmade handle here. I just put it in the vise. The fret wire goes in. You can see it curving out of the other end. The curve matches, and that's exactly what I want. The 2 main tools I need at this point is something to cut the lengths that I need. And you can use side cutters for this piece. Almost anything that'll cut through a normal fret wire. This is just normal nickel fret wire as opposed to the stainless steel, which really needs a really good cutter. But you can see, and I'll hold this up, if you've never seen these before, the way they cut is here. This way, when I go to cut off the ends, I can put this right up against the edge of that fretboard. And the other one is it's called a fret tang nipper, which I'll demonstrate. But basically, I'm going to cut off a little bit of the piece that goes down into the fretboard because I don't want it sticking out. This was from an old neck template, and even though this isn't exactly the same scale, it's close enough that I can just take this. I'm just going to hold it up against the fret. There's a little block there, and I've deliberately created myself a little extra space. Snip it off. It's now the correct radius, and it's more than long enough, as you can see. I deliberately want it maybe 1/8 of an inch long on each side. It gives me a little wiggle room as I go through. But by doing it this way, I know they're big enough, but without wasting a lot. So as I cut it to the length that I want, I just put it in the corresponding hole. Keeps them from getting lost, keeps me from getting them mixed up. Just makes my life easier. So let me just do one more here, and you get the idea. I don't need to film me clipping every one of these. All right, let me clip the rest of these and I'll get back to you. So the fret wire's been radiused, cut to rough length. And now what I want to do is I want to cut a little bit off the bottom of each one so that it doesn't stick out when you're done. There's a little groove here that the fret wire slides in sideways. And then when I pull down, you can see where it's cut a little bit of that bottom away. And I'll do both sides. And all I do is I look. It's still a little long, so I can trim a little bit more off. This is one of those things that I'm super fussy about. What I want is just a little bit of space. I've never measured, but I'm going to guess it's about less than a 32nd of an inch. That when I set this in there, hammer it in and trim it, that this is actually back. I believe that's back a little bit. And then I fill in that cavity with the sawdust that I save from when I radius the fretboard. Avoids any pointy sharp edges, gives me a nice smooth side piece. So I'm going to go ahead and do some of these. It'll be much clearer once I've actually set one in. So I'm ready to start installing some frets here. So there's the fret wire cut and trim for the 5th fret, and you can see where the tang is just a little shorter, so when it goes in, it won't be sticking out, and I can fill those ends with the sawdust. And I've got a arbor press here that I've rigged up with a return spring and a 12-inch radius pressing caul. There's this cork-filled piece that fits the neck, holds it level, and if I need to, I can slide in a little angle piece underneath the heel. And if I keep this right at the front, then I know it's centered over the neck. So it's a pretty simple operation. I've got the fret slot, I've got the fret cut, tang trimmed. I'm going to set this so that there's a little space of empty fret slot either side of that tang that I trimmed. And I'm not going to hammer it all the way in. I'm just going to give it a couple of taps. That just sets it in place so it stays straight. And then this just slides down here. The first few are always the slowest, and then you get in the rhythm of it. And then you just pull the handle down. It puts a lot of pressure. So it gives me a nice, perfectly seated fret. And then I can come back with the cutters. Let's see, again, it's really nice. That's a nice flush cut. Do both sides. Here, as you can see, what you're seeing is empty slot because the bottom of that fret tang is back a 32nd, not even a 32nd of an inch. The same is true on the other side. And those will get filled in, so you won't be able to see the space. Okay, let me do a couple more. Again, picking the fret, slide this out of the way a little bit. Give it a little tap, just to seat it. Slide it over under the arbor press caul. Give it a push. What's really nice about using the arbor press rather than just hammering them in is, one, it's pressing it in evenly across the radius of the fret. Two, is it's giving me even pressure as I go down the fretboard. I've actually in a couple of cases been able to not even have to touch the frets afterwards. They were dead level from the get-go. This speeds it up, the whole process in the end. Okay, so you can see I've got all the frets installed. Right now, this would, cut you up if you ran your hand along there. So I'm going to take a file and file the fret ends flush against the side of the fretboard. Then I'm going to file the bevel in. And you can buy beveling files that are set at a certain degree. To be honest, I just do it freehand. I need to be able to check that the frets are level in the sense that there's no high spots or low spots or high or low frets. If there are, I need to level it and then recrown those frets. So I've got some other files here that I may or may not need. And I also will need to be rounding over the fret ends. The extra step that I'll be taking also, as I mentioned, is all the fret end holes here are going to get filled. The initial steps, which require me to be filing the metal frets, I don't want to leave metal shavings all over the place, and I don't want to get them embedded into the fretboard. So this is just an old piece of some scrap with a felt concave piece to hold that, and it doesn't need to be firm. It's just to kind of hold it level. And I just put a piece of newspaper underneath to catch the files. And now I'm going to need to tape off in between the frets. And this is for delicate surfaces, and it's deliberate. I don't want to end up pulling up any wood grain or doing any damage or leaving a bunch of residue that, yes, I could clean up, but this just makes life easier. I used to try to use different size tape as the space gets smaller stuff. I've got a much quicker and more economical way of doing it. I actually start with the big 1.5 inch roll. Let me do a few frets to show you what I mean. So I just pull off a section I know is wide enough. Put it right up against the edge of the fret. One of my favorite tools in the shop for all sorts of things, single edge razor blade. And if I do this straight or with a little bit of a downward motion, it keeps it right up against that. And you'll see what, after I do 3 or 4 of these, you can see what I'm able to do. With a guitar neck, normally what happens about the time I get to the 4th fret, I've got a big enough piece left over that I can start moving this way with the leftover piece. And I end up meeting about, I think about the 13th, 14th fret, depending on the neck. It's just about an exact fit. By the way, I'm holding this not down, but this way. This won't cut the fret, but it would score the fretboard, and I don't want any razor blade marks on the fretboard. Reverse it, so I'm using the straight edge on the lower fret where it'll fit. Same thing, smooth it in there. It's probably about a 45 degree I'm holding that razor blade. So again, you can see I've got this little piece of leftover tape, and trying to get that, if you're just going to try and throw it in the trash, but I deliberately just put it sticky side down, all in the same pile. Takes it off my finger, keeps them all in one spot, and when I'm done I have basically one thing to throw away and not a bunch of sticky little pieces of tape all over the place. And this should be my last one. Okay, all taped off, just the frets exposed, so I can go ahead and file away and not worry about contaminating that fretboard. I have filed the fret ends smooth and put the initial bevel in. I want to make sure that the frets are level to each other. So I'm literally just using this, the edge of this old level is dead flat. It lets me, I've already looked, you know, I can hold it up to the light and make sure that there's not a big just general bend in the neck. So the neck's level, and actually the frets look really good. You actually could just put, you know, self-adhesive sandpaper on this and level it. I know some people, if guitar builders may shudder at this because it's not some expensive aluminum bar, that it's a maple, quarter sawn maple block, but this is absolutely dead level to within a couple thousandths of an inch. So I've just put some 600 grit here, and so I know where my high and low spots are. I just have a Sharpie. I just go across the top of the frets. So I'm making a very distinct line across the very top crown of each fret. Just give that a few seconds to make sure it's dry. Now I'm just going to make a couple of light passes. Obviously the neck is narrower here and wider here. Is the center to center is the easiest, but you can see it really well, I think. Well, let me even do it this way so it's even thinner. If I run that down the middle, that the space here is thinner than the space there, so that when you're leveling this part, you actually want to have that angled slightly, because you're trying to get it level from the outside to the outside, center to center. Lay this on, let the weight pretty much of the wood do the work. So you can see, I think, and I'll do the outside the same way. And again, I'm going to angle it in slightly. And just work my way across the fret and then angle it the other way very lightly. So then if I go down and look, for example, this fret, there's almost all the Sharpies gone. Where this fret, none of it is. That means this fret was set in a little harder, a little deeper. And we're talking, again, very few thousandths of an inch. So all I have to do is, again, make just a few more passes until there is no Sharpie visible. Now you could do this with 400 grit very easily, but I like using 600. It just makes, well, it takes a few more passes, gets me very I don't have to take off more than I need this way. Now we're getting to it. It's good to know where the neck is going to join the body. So on this one, about the last 5 frets, almost 6 on this one, are going to be, if you will, the body will be below that, and whether it's glued or bolted doesn't matter. So this section of the neck, 1, it's really thick at the heel, and 2, then it's fastened to the body. These frets aren't going to move. This part of the neck really isn't going to move, no matter how much you crank that truss rod. That it's going to move from this being about the center to about here. Think from about the nut to the 17th fret, just generically, depending on what scale guitar you're looking at. It won't be really much of an issue with this bass, but especially if you're playing, a guitar and you want really low action, you have to create a fall away at the end so that you're manually kind of creating so that this fret is a slightly lower than this one, just those last 3 or 4. I'm just demonstrating because it doesn't hurt to do it. It's the same idea. It's just that I'm going to deliberately, as I go off, put a little downward pressure. And the sandpaper starts about where this line is, so I'm not actually sanding those frets there. And I'm just going to and what I can see too is just how much I'm taking off of each individual fret, which helps me gauge how much fall away I've created. And that's more than enough for this instrument. So I can just take a little bit of alcohol now and wipe off those frets to get rid of any little Sharpie that's on the side. Frets are level, ready for recrowning. Okay, I've really zoomed in here on a couple of these frets. From leveling, it's taken that crown off the top of the fret, so the fret top is now level. I need to recurve that. So I'm going to use a fret crowning file. Just a few passes. Having a raking light, I've got a work light off to the side here, shining across the fret tops is really helpful. So I can see when that top has gone from flat to re-rounded. I deliberately picked probably the fret that would have been the highest. And I'm not using a lot of pressure. I'm letting the file do the work. Almost there. Okay, so that one's done. But you think even though that frets are, I'll use the Sharpie as an example, are really, a rounded thing. If you think of them as a triangle, when I leveled them, the tops of all those triangles now are even, but some are flatter than others. I'm just restoring the curve, but I don't want to take any more off where the top is or they won't be level again. So it's just when that disappears when you stop. To be honest, you can get overly obsessive about it. Depending on the action, your final string action, string gauge, whether you tune down, there's all sorts of things that you might end up with fret buzz, or you might never have a problem even with a neck that's got heavily uneven frets, especially like a neck that's been played a lot. So it just, to be honest, it becomes a matter of experience and touch. But you want to get them up front with a new build like this as close as you can. The other thing is, the reality is once the neck is on the body and strung up and under tension, it changes everything. So you can chase yourself. It's like chasing your own tail after a while. But if you put a dial gauge on these, and one is 1/10,000th of an inch higher than the other, in reality, in the real world of playing, you can't tell that. So if you're new to this, when I did the little demo of recrowning a couple of frets, is I used this file. And there's 2 different fret sizes. So I made sure I put a little arrow on it so I knew which side to use. And it's an actual file that there are teeth in here. And you got to be sure to keep it clean and it helps to put a little oil on it, and you're really filing in one direction with it. I like it. I'm used to it, but if you were new to them, you can leave chatter marks and so on. Another possibility is, and again, you can get these from various suppliers, it's the same idea. It's made for both medium and jumbo frets, one side for one side for the other. But what they've done is they've created the little mini radius in there and then coated it with industrial, very fine diamonds. The nice thing about that is you can go in both directions. There's nothing to clog. You can wipe it out occasionally. If you were a beginner, this is what I would advocate that you get, not the regular file. I find that there's a little more polishing work afterwards with this, strangely enough, than there is with the file. But you're much less likely to create chip out marks on the frets from chattering a file. Remember when I set the frets in, I cut the tang away a little bit. So what you're left with, so there's no sharp tang sticking out, and now these fret ends are beveled and rounded over. But you can see the little space that's left. When I radius the fretboard, I save the really fine sawdust. I just put a little pile right over the hole. I'm just going to work that in. And you'll notice that the fretboard is not sitting absolutely straight up. It's tilted a little bit because I'm going to be using some very thin CA glue, which will run down in there, which is fine, but I don't want it coming out on the top of the fretboard. So I just have the headstock clamped so that it's just, the fretboard is just tilted a little bit towards me. Just put a little pressure on there, get it actually into that little hole, take the edge of the, I will be the first to admit that this is a slow, tedious process, but it's well worth it in the end. And then I've just got some thin CA glue, but most importantly is I've got a little whip on the end, so I can really control the amount, because I just want a little bit. And I'm only going to do, when I'm doing this, I only work at 1 or 2 at a time. See, it'll immediately start to wick in and pull that. And it's okay if it runs down because there's going to be some final sanding here. And I can take a little more of the dust. And now I've got this kind of pudding-like goop, if you will. I can really get it down in there with the flat of the, make sure I'm not, kind of clean up the edge of the fret. Now I could just, literally give it time to walk away and let it dry. I'm going to use a little activator. Okay, now that's dried hard. And this is just a piece of scrap with some 150 grit. Again, normally I wouldn't do this step until I had them all done. Starting to see the idea here. Get a little finer grit here. And use very fine, like this is actually 600 grit to really smooth those ends over. But you can see is they're pretty much disappeared. Give you the ideas. It's not that it'll be absolutely invisible. You'll see a little dark mark there, but it's smooth, it's filled in. It just gives you a very nice finished look. The other thing that does is, it's basically plugged that end. There's a little bit of space underneath the fret wire. When I flip it over to the other side, before I put the sawdust in, I will wick in thin CA glue that goes underneath that fret and really, in case it seats them in. I don't always do that. Sometimes, some people like to glue in frets, some people don't. I'm kind of from guitar to guitar, just depends on my mood. With this one, I think I'm going to, and it's an easy way to do it, because then it doesn't just drip all out the end. It fills in the channel very nicely. And then you just finish it off again the other side with a little bit of saved fretboard, sawdust, and CA glue.